Well, so I don't have like a weekly to record, but I did at least want to like talk about like some big business, I guess, or like things that have been circulating around social media this week. News related stuff. Of course, 12.1 is like the big thing that's going on. We got the official announcement. It's going to come out the week of the 11th or 12th or so. I'm going to have some cool plans that I'll be talking about, not today, but I'll be talking about them as we get closer to patch time, because it might be a lot of fun, especially for housing folk, and even interesting for non-housing folk. Because hopefully there'll be some cool stuff coming in the near future. But I do want to talk about this. Grabbing this from Wowhead, it made the rounds during Final Fantasy XIV's Fan Fest. It's like their BlizzCon of sorts, where they have like these series of conventions that go on like all over the world, and then they kind of like piecemeal reveals and news about upcoming stuff about their game Final Fantasy XIV, which in the past, the real quick crash course. Like, it came out at first, people didn't like it. They shut the thing down, rebuilt it from the ground up pretty much, called it A Realm Reborn. The rest is history. Even back then, the game director, the current game director, and even I think the one before, like, they were heavily inspired by World of Warcraft as, like the thing to kind of look up to. And then, of course, they made their own style of MMO since then. And of course, at least between fandoms, between the WoW fandom and the Final Fantasy fandom, there's always a lot of like this, right? Like, you have that kind of like regular beefing from certain folks that are like, oh, which game is better, and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, other folks are like, I play both. I'm just gonna enjoy myself. And I myself personally, like, I enjoy it as a visitor. Like, I'll come by every now and then, drop by every few expansions, and like check things out. I haven't checked anything out for a while. But at some point, I'll re-up the sub, play through the story, be like, all right, sweet, awesome story, and then, dip out and then get back to housing here in WoW. So this recent article comes from FanFest, where the game director is just kind of like lost in World of Warcraft because they had tried out housing, but I guess it's better for me to read the quote that was provided here. So they were asked from Gamer Escape, do you have any plans to modernize the housing system in Final Fantasy XIV going forward? This is especially under the context of, hey, WoW's come out with their own version of housing. People are liking it. Do you have a response to that? And so he says, oh, yes, I think this question has maybe been refined. It's a little bit vague, a little bit more ambiguous. I get the feeling that what you really want to ask is, well, World of Warcraft, it's come up with this amazing housing system. How about Final Fantasy XIV? So I'm sure all of those journalists and creators out there who have been with us on this journey for a long time, back at the time of the Realm Reborn, I think you would know that we have an immense respect for the World of Warcraft team. So when we saw that the WoW team announced the expansion and this new housing system, and they said this specifically that they looked to 14 and incorporated things which they wanted to surpass us on, I think that in itself is very much a sense of great honor for us to hear. And of course, I had some hands-on time with the WoW housing system myself, and I really do appreciate it. It's amazing. We always like taking on new challenges. So this time around, when I tried WoW's housing, I thought it really is amazing, and it's been a good source of research. So I can't exactly say when it'll happen, but what I can say is that for sometime during the course of their patch series of this upcoming expansion called Evercold, we're planning 2 very big overhauls for housing. Didn't say anything yet. But folks have been reacting to this. First off, it's like the whole, wow, it's great that we see developers praising each other, which is, I was saying this earlier, it's not so much of a surprise, it's more like a reminder. The gaming industry and its staff and the folks that work on these things, it's pretty small by comparison to other software industries. A lot of folks, it's not like a village, it's not that small town, but people tend to know each other. It's a smaller family. And so when it comes to, think of like the fandoms, like we're down here and we're like, rubble, Final Fantasy XIV versus WoW, classic versus retail, that sort of thing. And we kind of butt heads, and not even to say above it, but more like behind the curtain among developers, folks are cool. it's not like they're like really like fighting each other. It's the business of things, and they're just trying to carve out their audiences and try to make something cool for their audience. But of course, every now and then there might be a little bit of that light ribbon, but what it really boils down to is to not have that sort of negativity on top of people just trying to work hard and keep their jobs and all that. They just want to make something cool. Now, as someone who I only barely touched their housing system, like I made an apartment, those things are free. But largely Final Fantasy XIV is all about scarcity. In order to get a house, you have to find the plot that you want, and then you have to bid for it. Hopefully you get it. And once you do have it, you got to kind of hold on to it, because if your sub happens to lapse for a certain amount of time, a couple of months or so, then your house is demolished. You lose that plot. Someone else can move in. If your sub continues to lapse, because what happens in 14, when your house is demolished, all that stuff is put into a little mail bag and it's, put into a mailbox somewhere, and you got to claim it. If you don't claim it, that bag will disappear too. So things that were in it, and these are things that I'm being told, things that are in it, including stuff that you only have one of, unique items, stuff that you bought from the shop as well, that stuff can potentially disappear. And so that's been a source of a lot of friction. And some folks, they've written narratives to suggest the game kind of holds you hostage. It's like, yo, you're in it now. Now you're kind of like sunk into this. You got to stay, otherwise you're going to lose your house and maybe all your stuff if your sub continues to lapse, or if something happens and you just can't re-up. Unlike World of Warcraft, where you have very little friction. Like, yo, you want the place you want? Cool. Just keep searching for it, and then you'll eventually get the view and the place that you want, and that's fine. And so I kind of want to highlight the difference there, because there's a lot of complaints that go on about World of Warcraft housing, where, especially with neighborhoods, some folks will complain, oh, my neighborhood's dead. There's like no one doing anything. There's no one going around doing stuff. All the houses, they just look like little placeholders, like they just put stuff down and like that's it. And a big reason because of that is because of the accessibility. It's kind of the consequence that happens when you are able to just have a house and it's there forever and it's never going to go away. Folks will, of course, take that for granted and be like, oh, well, I'll get back to that whenever I feel like it. That's me too. Like, my exterior looks like nothing pretty much. The interior is different, but the exterior doesn't look very impressive. And so people who are doing flybys in the neighborhoods, if you can find the neighborhood that you want to fly by, more often than not, you're not going to find a whole lot of stuff there. In 14, it's less likely. And again, it's because of the whole scarcity aspect of things. Folks who are into housing, they're very much into the game. They're really all in. They have, it's that next level of investment, because one, they're doing stuff for the house, and two, they retain their subscription for the entire time. So that's kind of the difference that we see something here. So, but it's also a complaint. Again, there are folks who think that they're forced to maintain their subscription just so they can keep their house. And so when they're talking about two big overhauls, there are only two things that I have in mind that I feel like are going to be like really effective on their part. One is if they adopt the freeform placement that WoW enjoys. It's a big plus that we can kit bash things however we like. We're able to make some crazy kinds of shapes. Every house that bothers with the advanced movement, it's going to feel unique in crazy ways. I mean, 14 has some wild builds as well. In many ways, they surpass World of Warcraft. But the fact that we can shape things the way we like here, and given the age of housing in WoW, the sky's the limit. There's a lot more that WoW will be capable of doing. And so over time, I'm hoping that that's one of the things that 14 develops. The other thing, too, is the scarcity aspect. And I think that's going to be the tougher one. There are two hurdles to overcome with that. Like, one, it's going to cost Square Enix a whole lot of money in order to create a world where there is no scarcity. They're going to have to hold on to a lot more data. There's like storage and yada yada. And then, with current pricing, that can get pretty crazy. WoW is willing to eat the cost. Will Final Fantasy 14 do it? After so many years, they haven't done it. So it's hard to see if they're going to adopt that sort of practice. But it's not just it's not just monetary. Like as I described, when it comes to WoW housing, you have a lot of empty neighborhoods. A lot of them feel like dead. There's not a lot going on. In 14, not as much, but it's because of the nature of things. So it's like, how do you do it? Or like, how do you manage a little bit of both? Where you can have everyone have the kind of house they want, where they want it, but also make things feel very vibrant and alive and everything. I'm not quite sure how to do it. There are other things too. There are other conversations going on in the space that I'm not knowledgeable about. Things that allude to like housing sizes and budgets and things like that. But those I think are like the really big ones. And that's kind of why I wanted to like bring this sort of thing up. It's kind of a big topic that mostly affects this game. That's what the news is about. But also like, depending on what Final Fantasy 14 does, what is WoW going to do in response? Or do they need to respond? Or should they just kind of focus on building up whatever that they're trying to do? Because there's a lot of catching up that WoW has to do as well. There's transmog as the core. There is, pets are coming. Mounts aren't here quite yet. Hunter pets aren't here. NPCs aren't here. There's a good ways to go. And it's not just 14 that is a great inspiration for housing. Other things like Elder Scrolls Online, that's been a big one that folks have looked at. People look into the past with WildStar as a place for WoW to adopt ideas from. So I'm gonna be curious to see like what other folks are going to be looking for when it comes to like updates with housing. But it is nice to see at least a little peek behind the curtain, what developers are saying of each other. So there is a second big conversation that's going on in the Final Fantasy 14 space, coming up from FanFest. And sorry, the stream happens to be over. This is another cut. Haha. But yeah, another big conversation is happening, and it involves their story. Going through Final Fantasy 14 story is extremely long, going through multiple expansions, and the way that it works, it's very different from World of Warcraft, where in Final Fantasy 14 there is what they call their main story quest line, or an MSQ, that spans through all the expansions in a very specific order. And from that, you're visiting all sorts of locales, you are meeting all sorts of characters, and so on and so forth. It's very, very long. It spans across many hours, many of the raids, many of the and dungeons, and it's very expensive. And for those who go through like the entire thing, there are two general results. One, you are a big fan, or two, you only make it so far until you stop and you're like, oh my god. Of course, there's a third option. Like, you are able to pay for skips just like you can in WoW. But in the case of skips in Final Fantasy XIV, they are met with this kind of like negative social stigma. Like, I infamously skipped through Realm Reborn and I played through everything else. But whenever I have any sort of opinion on the story going forward, I get shut down, or I get gatekept or whatever, because I skipped out on some very important story, and it was important, but I also wanted to just kind of play through. And so that's kind of what's being put into conversation in this current FanFest, where the game director is considering ways for players to skip through a chunk of the story, and so they can get into like raids, dungeons, whatever, or basically play with their friends in the most current expansion. And there's a lot of back and forth within the Final Fantasy XIV community about like whether or not that's going to be a healthy thing. There are folks that, just as I was saying, if you don't experience the entire story, these many hundreds of hours that you put in going through all the expansions and side quests and all that, then you're not like a real fan, or you're not going to be like a genuine enjoyer of this game, because it's such a big part of the identity of it. And to many extents, I agree. It's a great story, but for those who want to just like meet the challenge and do raids and be challenged by like their Savage or Ultimate content, that's like their high-end PvE sorts of offerings. They just want to get into that. Like, how do you do that without feeling forced to pay for a skip, which is kind of like their only option? And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I want to, I'm very curious as to how 14 is going to handle this, because we look back at World of Warcraft and how they handle their stuff, how they handle burning through like many expansions, more than what Final Fantasy 14 has. And so they're running into like kind of this similar situation where it's like, okay, people want to play endgame stuff. There's an audience for that. Should they be denied that, or should they only have like the only recourse is to like pay extra money so that way they can play the game? Because that sort of narrative can be written. It's like, oh, okay, so if I want to play endgame with my friends, not only am I paying for the sub and the boxes and whatever, I got to pay extra because I don't want to waste, quote, waste this many hours because all I want to do is play with my friends. So I think there's a good conversation to have there, and I'm very curious again how Final Fantasy 14 is going to handle it, because WoW's method of doing it, it's well, it kind of sucks. In my opinion, it's not very great, because in WoW, as many of us know, we just kind of level up, and once we reach a level requirement, then we can progress to like the next thing. And before more recent times, folks played through like one expansion or maybe one expansion, and then they shot all the way over to like Legion or something like that during its time. These days, it's a little bit different, but what's happening is, hey, we might be going through a more cohesive single expansion experience, but then once we're done with that, then we skip like a whole bunch of other expansions, some of which have happened in the past, and then all of a sudden now we're here in like the Midnight Story. And that feels very disjointed. It makes new players feel like, okay, what happened here? And it's not even limited to that. There's a lot of things that are going on with class development at an early level, and like the gameplay and how people are eased into like the likes of dungeons and whatnot, and that sort of behavior. Like the way I look at it, when I look at both of these games, there are these vulnerabilities that just happen with age, where things just start to get heavy. And the way that it's being handled, no matter which game it is, no matter what the method is, there's going to be some sort of give and take. There's going to be some sort of compromise. In my opinion, I think WoW has it worse off right now. It just feels like really busted for folks who are, if you're trying to explain the story and like the progression of like your fledgling little character over in Northshire Abbey and how they became like a god of the universe or whatever, it's very hard to explain that. In 14, it's a very long story. There's a lot of twists and turns and lots of characters that you meet, but at the very least, it's much more coherent. And right now, up to this point, gamers are mostly forced to run through that story. So while that might filter people out, it ultimately feels like a healthier story that's being told. And so I'm going to be very curious as to like how they want to handle this. And I think that that Square Enix is in a good position to handle this much better than WoW is right now, because, well, they're kind of at that crossroads, and now they can handle this in certain ways. Like, for example, there might be a sort of a bridge story where, hey, the Warrior of Light, the main character in the story who you play as, they can play through like just a shorter version of the MSQ, where they will still visit all the different expansion areas. They will still be able to experience all the big beats and still come out of it, largely connected to the story. Maybe there's a lot of like side quest content that they missed out on and other main story things, but there might be like a few like favorite moments and favorite characters that these people will meet, and that stays intact. So that sounds like the best case scenario. World of Warcraft, they're gonna, the way I see it, it feels like they're gonna have to almost start from scratch. They'd have to really like go back and create from the ground up kind of the same sort of thing. Like, okay, what would be the main story quest line for a character in World of Warcraft? It feels a lot messier because from the get-go, a WoW character, they have like a different race, they have a different story behind them, which is the same case in Final Fantasy XIV, but I think like just the way that just the places that people start and the way that the story just sort of starts coming together at the very beginning, it might feel a little bit more messy. As the expansions go, though, since those are smaller continents, more cohesive stories that happen through there, I think that'll be a lot easier. It's really just the beginning that's going to be like, okay, what's the best way to handle this? Because there's that potential of missing so much story. And then, of course, even in the case of both games, how is the rest of the story, the forgotten story, how's that going to be treated? I don't know, and it's really going to depend on like how are we going to make that a bit more accessible. I think WoW has kind of a good idea with the with the lore walker stuff that's coming in, where they have like these new stories, not even new stories, they're like old stories, but they're being retold, repackaged in something that feels cohesive, complete, and something that folks can fully understand for the most part. But I think in the case of WoW, they'll have to be a lot more aggressive with stuff like that. But also, they'll still need to have some sort of main story quest line that'll help players feel the story happening in a certain order, in a way that it kind of builds up to everything that's going on in this current saga.